Cool. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, thank you. And yeah, that Animal Farm piece may need to be updated. I'm still debating it. It may need to be updated to include another community. Uh, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Well, so I've been out of the loop of things a bit too. I was taking a bit of a break, and it's not like I haven't been paying attention, but I haven't been paying as much attention as I maybe should have been, and I also just wasn't. I just wasn't interested in commenting on anything for a while, and I don't know. I was having a conversation because I had seen some stuff being posted, and then I started just doing a deep dive into everything that had been happening the last few months, and I thought, this is crazy. This just sounds exactly like the stuff that Bitcoin Cash forked from. Um, and I think I'm starting to have this sort of, I think, revelation that just because somebody agrees with you on a concrete sort of idea doesn't mean, or an application of an idea doesn't mean that they understand the fundamental behind it, um, which is very hard to grasp. So just because someone is saying that we need cheap transactions, for example, doesn't mean they understand the process by which those cheap transactions are created. Um, just because they're saying the block size should be raised doesn't mean they understand the process by which the block size should be raised. And I think a lot of people are missing the distinction. Um, I guess what's going on, I think I saw this with Core, is like people are treating Bitcoin like a SaaS product versus an economic system. And an economic system affects everybody. It doesn't just affect you and your customers. And so it's very difficult to have all of the knowledge you could possibly have, uh, or you could possibly need in order to perfectly plan an economic system. This is what the central planners try to do. They try to take into account all the possible knowledge that they would need for every single dispersed actor in an economic system who have their own, values and goals and competencies, and then try to create the exact conditions for things to work out in some predetermined optimal way. And this just doesn't work. It never works because, I guess, primarily because the knowledge that is necessary in order to do that is just not there. So I see that in Core. Obviously, they created a 1 megabyte block size for these arbitrary security standards, and then were, I guess, surprised when BTC started becoming, hamstrung in its growth, because they weren't taking into consideration all the other factors that are necessary in order to create an economic system. And now I see that in Bitcoin Cash, unfortunately, as well, which is not understanding what makes Bitcoin Bitcoin. I guess is the better way to put it. Yeah. Well, okay, so ideology is important and it's not important. I mean, in the sense that, so one of the things I like about BSV is this goal to lock the protocol down, because what that does, at least in theory, is it protects Bitcoin from stupid people and stupid ideologies, right? Ideology is everywhere, though. I think when people say that they don't have an ideology, they're either trying to obscure, they either don't understand themselves, or they're not trying to, or they're trying to hide the fact that they do have an ideology, and they don't want you actually looking at what that is, right? It sort of gives them a blank check on doing anything they want if they claim not to have an ideology. The fundamental fact is everything is guided, every human being is guided by a philosophy. You don't have a choice of not being ideological. The only choice is, what ideology do you have? Do you understand it? And is it rational? And so when he says things like ideology doesn't matter, I mean, that's just nonsense. I mean, because what the whole issue with Core and with Bitcoin Cash right now, I think, is ideological. Like a 2 megabyte soft cap is not a technical soft cap. We know they can go higher than that. Why stop at that point? Well, it's because someone has determined that decentralization and nodes should be prioritized over something else. That's an ideological decision. I mean, in my opinion, that's a very egalitarian way of looking at Bitcoin. It's a very uncapitalistic way of looking at Bitcoin. As an ideological thing, though, when they try to pass it off as a code thing, that's exactly what Core did, which is why this whole term code is law. I've always understood the way they talk about it to mean really, anything that I code is good, essentially, because code is law, and I can sort of cheat the laws of economics because code is law. And it's just not true. Code has to follow a rational philosophy, or it's not going to work. Yeah, I mean, so this whole ideology thing, that's just nonsense. I mean, I'm sorry, but I can't imagine, and I don't want to go too off on a tangent about personalities, but I can't imagine someone saying it's not money if you can't use it for prostitutes and bribing politicians. That's an ideological statement. So saying ideology doesn't matter, I mean, is nonsense. That's okay. We can start over too if you need to. I don't mind. That's okay.
All right, there we go. Now it's working. Okay. I think you've said a lot of good things, so I'm actually going to keep this, but I will reiterate what I have said and then to frame what you've said already. Okay. Which, number one, if no one heard me, everyone should go read Deryk's piece about Bitcoin Core and Animal Farm. You should read a ton of the other stuff that he's written because it's all really good about Bitcoin. And then very lastly, everyone should go look at his Satoshi Nakamoto. What is it called? Is it
NakamotoStudies.org?
Thank you. Nakamoto
still incomplete. I'm still, it's kind of an ongoing process, but it has a lot of the stuff up there. I'm currently kind of working on behind the scenes on making it faster, making it primarily like static HTML. I built it real quick on WordPress, and I've sort of moved away from WordPress recently just because too slow for what I want to do.
So why are Satoshi's words important, and why did you bring it upon yourself to even make that website? That would be another question.
Well, I mean, it comes back to what we were just talking about, ideology. I mean, I think ideology actually matters. The way you view, your economic understandings of the world were going to influence the directions that Bitcoin goes in a very dramatic way. I mean, I can't believe people don't understand this. I mean, the ideologies of the developers of Bitcoin Core very clearly influenced the development of Bitcoin Core. These are guys who are terrified of markets, who are terrified of big corporations, who are terrified of capitalism, despite being, sort of ostensibly anarcho-capitalists, and that influences the way in which they developed Bitcoin, which was to sort of prioritize everybody running their own node. This, ridiculous egalitarian idea that everyone in Bitcoin needs to be equally capable of doing the exact same thing, and that's just nonsense. And I think seeing everything kind of going on with the Nakamoto Institute, and it's like, if this is the only way people can get introduced to Satoshi Nakamoto's ideas, that's just one step away from getting introduced to all the nonsense in Core and thinking that, okay, these guys are the experts. And I kind of, one of the revelations that I had was actually, funny enough, I didn't really know Daniel Krawietz. And so I had seen the Nakamoto Institute, And I guess I just sort of assumed that Daniel was like that. I sort of assumed he was like, Pierre Rochard or Blipstein. And then I met him and I was like, oh God, he's totally different, right? So that was like, but from my perspective, it's like the guys running it really influence the way in which people are going to see that kind of material and the lens through which they're going to interpret it. So I wanted to offer another channel.
And I guess more from like a personal note for you. Well, okay. So there's another good example, I guess, because this is where I loosely follow, I guess, what's going on in Bitcoin Cash nowadays, just out of my own pure interest.
Yeah.
So Steve Patterson is another person. So what I've noticed is all these people that have these really interesting economic ideas are kind of like getting like pushed out of Bitcoin Cash because they're not, I don't know, in a very similar vein to Bitcoin Core. If you're not a developer, if you're not like, specifically if you're not a protocol developer, that seems to be, even if you're like an application developer, if you're not a protocol developer, intimately familiar with like, all the latest like things that they are doing on the protocol level, then your opinion is irrelevant and you don't know what you're talking about and whatever else. And Steve Patterson strikes me as one person who, I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, but he clearly to me understands that economics is important in Bitcoin.
Yep. He's one of the smartest people, I would say, in that I know about a whole lot of stuff, not just Bitcoin. And he's someone I'm in close communication with pretty regularly because he's just a really good thinker, and he's someone that I've sort of been friend with for quite a while, again, outside of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think to add to your point, I guess, I don't know what I should have expected, but I guess I didn't expect the level of hate that I got for saying things, both openly and privately, that I got. I felt like this is stuff I've been saying. Like none of what I'm saying now is like fundamentally different from what I was saying before. It's like the communities that's changed, the people involved that's changed, and yeah, I guess I assumed, well, the people would be a bit more open or willing to discuss. Instead, now on Reddit I get flagged with a BSV troll bot, and I was getting called a BSV troll, even though I specifically said, like, I hope I'm wrong. I really tried to be as respectful as possible, and really try to say, look, I want Bitcoin Cash to succeed, but I guess there's a new culture at play, and it reminds me a lot of Core, certainly.
I don't want to like beat a horse dead or anything like that, but I think from like a learning perspective, this is where things are interesting to me, and this is where things have always been interesting to me, is the intersection of economics and Bitcoin, right? The intersection of like how these things are important, and the central planning aspect we've kind of already covered, right? To the point where if you have a developer that can influence the direction, as Hayek would say, that's the greatest totalitarian, right? The greatest totalitarian would be someone that can direct the economic society, I guess, at will, right? But what else? So I guess this is the other thing that's always interested me, and what interested me the most was when the Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin SV debate was happening. I remember Ryan Charles made a video about one of the opcodes that they were debating, but he was the only person I've ever seen say like, hey, we're making a technical change. What if it's a subsidy, right? And he mentioned, what if this thing is a subsidy? I always admired Roger Ver, like when he told Samson Mao, like on stage, he had to explain to him what a subsidy was, right? With respect to SegWit. And from a personal perspective, what I really appreciate about the people that are pretty much they seem to only be in Bitcoin SV this time, but everyone seems to appreciate the fact that we're not messing with this technical system. We are, there are economics at play, and there are things that might have unintended consequences in the end.
Yeah.
And I guess I don't know if I have a question for you, but it's more, why do more people not appreciate this? And why, like you said, you have not changed anything you've said. Everything that you're saying now, you've been saying, and that's why I really appreciated reading it back then as much as I do today.
Well, I feel like it comes back to what I was saying in the beginning. It's like there's a difference between understanding uh, the premises behind what you're saying and repeating sort of concrete applications of particular premises, which is why like we see so many people who are like ostensibly libertarians, but they will regress to some particular form of statism anytime they're seriously challenged, or they'll all have their sort of pet statist project. I just think it's very difficult to think like that, to think kind of from first principles, and so. Uh, but at the same time, I was surprised. I would say I'm definitely caught off guard by the level to which that kind of thinking has been, I guess, absent in the community at this point. But yeah, I mean, this idea that they're going to properly determine the level of decentralization in advance that the Bitcoin needs to have in order to secure itself is just so silly. And yeah, like you said, unintended consequences. They don't really seem to get that doing that means you're deprioritizing something else. So we already saw this, and we're seeing some of the failures of central planning. And this is not 100% Bitcoin Cash's fault because Bitcoin Core put this in place. But the limit on the 25 unconfirmed transactions, it was posted in Reddit the other day by Satoshi Dice that they were actually being hampered by the fact that this limit was in place. So their business is actually not being able to grow on the Bitcoin Cash blockchain because this thing is in place. And that's a failure of Core's central planning. And I see the exact same mindset happening still again. These guys are not learning from experience that it's not who's doing the central planning. It's central planning as such. It doesn't matter like who is in charge. It's just the whole process itself. And I think they seem to think, oh, well, we've got the right developer now. We've got the right company now. We've got the right people now. That doesn't matter. That's the same error people fall into when they think that they're just going to elect a politician and they're going to solve all their problems because they sound good. It doesn't really matter. It's the system itself. And it's the ways by which you're determining that information that matter, not who's in charge. It could be, the most noble person possible. It doesn't really matter because they're not going to have the kind of information needed to turn Bitcoin into the system it needs to be. I think that's one of the things I agree with SB on is I think, in general, removing the limits, allowing it to actually be a real market versus hobby coin and something where the limits could change arbitrarily based on some developer's pet security concern. I mean, that's ridiculous. You're never going to grow that way.
I think what I find richly ironic too is the idea of like censorship resistance, right? So that is flown around all the time. Censorship resistance. And I remember when Bitcoin Cash was first formed, everyone was pointing to like Luke Dashir, and they were pointing out how ridiculous it was that like Satoshi Dice was essentially censored off the Bitcoin network because of fees, right? So the fees were a product of censorship. And now in the same vein, I remember when again, this was right when the SV fork happened. I was getting so frustrated because it was like, well, Bitcoin isn't a data layer. You shouldn't use it for data transactions. Like, okay, well, so first of all, a payment is data. Like no matter what, a payment is some amount of data, right? So now who centrally plans the size of the transaction that I can make, right?
Yep.
That would be step number one. And then step number two, now you are censoring anybody who wants to make more than a 5 kilobyte transaction or whatever, right? And so all of these like principles that we all say we love about Bitcoin, it just seems like, in some capacity, it seems like maybe we aren't going to allow that to happen just because those guys are doing it, and it's like, whatever else. But these things that everyone, when we first forked away from Bitcoin Core, said were like important things, permissionless. They love the word permissionless. Okay, well, I now have to ask permission from someone to build my business, because what if my business isn't allowed to have a transaction of X size, right?
Well, you've got Satoshi Dice literally going to Reddit to ask permission. I mean, that does not look like. Can you imagine, like in any other space? Can you imagine like the CEO of I don't know, just like Dell or any company really, Apple or any business anywhere, going to freaking Reddit to ask the developers to like help them? That's just that. I mean, that alone, that people don't see a problem with that is scary. And I think Mike Hearn pointed it out, over a year ago in his AMA, saying that these kind of things are problems. I see the exact same things in Core that I saw in Cash that I saw in Core, which is basically, these Reddit forums and chat groups and stuff like that, and developers controlling everything. Like that does not look like a healthy industry. You don't want that. So this idea that the devs are not in control, that's nonsense. Of course they are. They're 100% in control right now. Now, they don't have to be in control, but right now, in the way things are playing out in ABC, the devs are definitely in control. And I think that's indicated by the fact that Satoshi Dice feels the need to go make a Reddit post about it.
Well, it's worth pointing out, I think that Reddit post is like 7 months old. I
Yeah.
believe they made that post a long time ago, too. And I remember I had a conversation with, I won't name who they are, but this was before the SV fork. A very prominent person, like someone who everyone knows their name in Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin SV. They had a use case for non-standard scripts, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And they were at a party with one of the ABC developers and was trying to pitch them on the idea that, I have this use case, I want to build it, whatever else. But the person wasn't convinced by the use case enough and said, this is stupid. We're not going to do this. We don't need to do this right now, right? And the amount of frustration to say, I have this great idea, I want to build a business, but in order for me to do it, I need the freedom to build the business on the blockchain. And now you have someone saying, no, you cannot do that. It's just, to me, it's mind-boggling that people aren't seeing this. And that's what I guess I've been so frustrated about for a very long time. Not just when Bitcoin Cash split, but it seemed like, in a way, I was upset at the time, but I'm happy that SV is its own chain now, just because there was so much. It's been so boring in Bitcoin SV from like an argument standpoint for about 6-8 months now. It's just like there's nothing to argue about. There's nothing to complain about. Like what people are arguing about now is just like, oh, I hate Twetch for this stupid reason. And it's
Exactly,
like,
and that doesn't matter.
fantastic. I don't care. Go argue about that. Whatever else, that's great. But I don't know. Anyway, I'm just trying to make the general point that it's just so mind-boggling to me that it does always seem to come back to. And I will admit, like Hayek is one of my favorite economists. I just love his critiques of planning just generally, and I think it extends to just about every facet of the world you can think of. But I just have yet to see an end to this idea that, well, like you said earlier. Well, at least they're not in charge, but now we're in charge, so it's good. It's okay. It's fine.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's what they seem to think, and that's just wrong. And again, it might not be wrong. Like, there's a good quote from Hazlitt, which is like, the good economist looks at the long-term consequences of a particular policy, not just what's immediately perceivable. So I got a lot of responses to my points on Twitter, which is like, things are great. The block sizes aren't really full. Like, we have SLP tokens and all this awesome stuff. It's like, that kind of reminds me of like, it's like the turkey that's being fed before Thanksgiving. And for like the month before Thanksgiving, it's getting fattened up and everything's awesome. And then it's like, you can imagine the turkey predicting everything's going to keep improving because I keep getting fed more and more and more. Like, we've never been better. And then the day Thanksgiving comes, they get their head cut off. Like, it's because he's not thinking long term. And so it's not the fact that things are okay now. It's what does that decision-making process look like at scale? So at any kind of scale, if you've got developers trying to plan the block size and plan the node levels and plan the prices and all that kind of stuff, you're going to have externalities, like big ones. It's going to be core all over again. And that's, I think, what they're not understanding. So things might be fine now. That's not the issue. And I'm surprised by how many people are taking the really short-range approach to thinking. It's about the precedent that's being set. And the precedent is that developers can decide what level of decentralization is proper, what level of competition is proper, what kind of transaction is proper, what's spam and what's not spam. I mean, this is very scary if you're trying to build an economic system. And I just don't see this playing out well if they continue on their same path. I mean, I see the exact same thing with core. We're going to reach a point where growth happens, assuming it does. I don't know whether it will or not, but if growth does happen, you're going to end up with people clogging the mempool or some other stupid thing, or businesses getting booted off because they've prioritized whatever their favorite security issue of the moment is.
So why is, maybe just from a top level down, why is centralization not a concern? And maybe from an economic point of view, what is centralization? What does that mean? What does that even mean?
Well, they're just committing the same fallacy that people commit when they get worried about monopolies. I mean, monopolies are only a problem when the state creates it. I mean, that's a huge issue because you're pushing out competition with some sort of law or some sort of, other barrier to entry imposed top down that makes it, very bad for everybody else. That's a failure of central planning right there. But a monopoly in a market, I mean, it's very hard to sustain. There really aren't a whole lot of examples of a true free market monopoly. And they're not really a concern because they always have to continue providing the best service, and there's always a new competitor that can enter the market. So, with Bitcoin, this level of this idea of decentralization, it's just a tool. Decentralization is not an end in itself. It's just a tool of securing the network. So the proper level of decentralization is a market function. It's not something to be determined by developers in advance. Like, it has to be open to market forces. Security itself is a market force. It's not something that you particularly need to worry about outside of the market. So, yeah, I mean, I guess that's why I'm not particularly worried about it. In my opinion, and I think this is borne out by history, markets tend to decentralize to a certain degree. And that degree is determined by the particular industry that you're in and the particular players in the industry. And it tends to work out in a better way than if you planned it in advance. I mean, the most nefarious kinds of centralization pretty much always happen when you've got someone trying to control things from behind the scenes.
That is so fantastic to hear, just from other people. In fact, I think probably 90% of people, even in no matter what Bitcoin chain you're in, have never even thought about that. They don't even, probably even have the understanding to get to that level. So very well said, I guess is what I would say. But so maybe I'm going to go through more things in Bitcoin and maybe just to hear your perspective on it. So if you could just, I mentioned, I think Roger had brought this up, but like, why are things like SegWit bad? Like why is SegWit from an economic point of view a bad thing?
I think that, I mean, really, they're kind of stealing fees from miners in a way, aren't they? I mean, I think that's a problem. I mean, and and I think that that's, I guess, the extent to which I've really thought about it. In my mind, it's really, I don't really care about SegWit as such. I care about it because it's not really a block size increase. It's a Band-Aid, and it's not really going to actually do anything long term. I think that's the biggest issue. Is you're just bumping the thing down the road. For me, it's not a huge priority, but I do think that ultimately it's sort of tinkering with the incentives and allowing you to sort of squeeze more transactions into the thing without paying fees. So,
what is your view on data in general? Like why should well, we've already talked about this, but I guess like just generally, I think this is the central debate. This is essentially now, if someone were to attack a Bitcoin SV, for example, or whatever, they go, well, blockchains aren't a database. Blockchains are a notoriously bad, slow database. And you even see this again. This is like stuff talked about in SV circles, that you can't just put everything on a blockchain, right? And I know that this debate comes back to the idea of central planning, like for the most part, but from a high level, like, I mean, at some point we're probably going to start repeating ourselves. So I'm trying to avoid that, I suppose.
Yeah, because I was just going to say that, if it's true, that's fine. Like, for me, it doesn't matter whether it's true or false. What matters is that the process of determining that is determined by a market process. So, like, people trying to say that, oh, you can't put X or Y on the blockchain, like, I don't think that matters. The idea is that anyone can try to push any kind of transaction possible and try to build a business model on it. And if it fails, and we don't really need to worry about it. I'm just surprised that it's such a concern about what people should and shouldn't be doing on the blockchain.
Yeah.
I think, like, okay, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Why worry about it then? The whole point is of a market is to allow people to experiment. And that's one of the things I like about having a lockdown protocol is once it's done, you're not really worrying anymore, right? I mean, people can come in and try to build something around it. And if it ends up being inefficient, if it ends up being the case that a blockchain is not the ideal to use, then great, right? I mean, just go do something else. But why worry about it? Why is it this constant fear? You either have a Bitcoin that everyone can try to use, and you allow people pursuing their own private interests and their own goals to try to use it as they see fit, or you don't. And yeah, I think the irony of people saying that they want decentralization while trying to control the kinds of transactions that can be put through is not lost on me, but it's lost on a lot of people, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I got to be honest. I think, which I think speaks to Bitcoin's genius. I think this does speak to its genius. Is that in such a compact amount of time, I think you have succinctly described why Bitcoin works in some capacity, because it is essentially just this market network thing that is there, and we can use it in such a way that we're not restricted by the old. Well, I think planners will be around forever, but I think from my perspective, the ability to build a business and to use Bitcoin for that without someone telling me that I can't do it, is, I think, the most powerful thing. I think everyone gets really stuck on this idea of like, well, Bitcoin is important because I can send money, from one place to another without someone stopping, and that's important. But to me, what's almost 10 times more important is that I can build a business that leverages this network without someone else telling me like how to build the business and that's, I think, the biggest struggle in the world today, is that it's very hard to build something without having to go through some kind of hurdle, whether that's regulatory hurdle or something else, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, the idea is that you can do what you want and you can succeed or fail accordingly, right? And I mean, that's the whole idea. I mean, I don't know how these guys who think they're going to try to like control the kind of transactions people put through on the blockchain, like how they're optimistic about Bitcoin. Because if they're that worried about it, I mean, just wait till we get like any kind of scale. People are going to be trying to do all sorts of things. So, it doesn't work if you try to hamper it and you try to control it and you try to limit it. It can't possibly work. The only way it works is if it goes to scale, and if it's big enough for people to try whatever the hell they want. And again, I just can't understand this mindset of worrying about like the failures of others. Like in a market, you don't worry about that. I don't worry if the idiot business that started down the street fails, because it's not really going to hurt me. That's the whole point. But everyone is so darn concerned about it, and they're thinking so small that Bitcoin's never going to succeed.
Yeah. Maybe outside of Bitcoin, like what have you been up to? Like, you've always had so many interesting things that you're doing that I've been curious about. I don't know what you've been up to in the past few months or whatever. So
yeah, well, I had some fun private things going on in my life right now, personal stuff, which is good. I'll maybe post a little bit about that soon. But I had a book that I was featured in recently about education. I had an essay published in that came out just I think in July or so. I'm working on a couple other book projects. One that's really interesting to me is this thing called this Operation Atlantis. It was this sort of attempt by this, I guess, billionaire in the 60s to start his own sort of free market capitalistic country in the Caribbean. And he actually got decently far in doing it, to the point where they almost had like a piece of land acquired, and they actually had, a bit of a homestead that was almost created. Ultimately, it failed, but I spent about 2 years trying to find this guy's book because it was privately issued, and it was just in very limited production run and just like no copies that I could ever find. I finally found one several months ago, and so I've been working on that, digitizing that, kind of re-releasing it with commentary and annotations and stuff. The guy's like heavily influenced by a lot of cool free market thinkers, and so I've been adding the references and notes and all sorts of stuff so I can kind of release an edition that's sort of telling what this guy was actually working on in his philosophy, because it's a fascinating guy. His name was Werner Stiefel. He fled the Nazis and as a kid came to the U.S. and built what became the largest dermatology private business in the country. And so he passed away in 2006, and in 2009, the company was sold for like $3 billion.
Wow.
So like really cool guy, and just lots of fascinating discussions about statehood and governance and stuff like that. So I guess that's been kind of another project that I'm working on. I've been going through a lot of the crypto anarchy mailing list posts, basically everything, reading every single post on them, on those threads. And there's been a lot of really interesting things I've found. It's pretty funny to read some of the discussions that were going on, and the really the debates, again, the debates between central planners and people who actually understood, the very few people who actually understood, as well as to see how people's opinions have changed quite a bit over the years. I remember I saw this post from Adam Back in like 1990 or something like that, or maybe 1995, and he basically said we need really fast digital cash that can be spent anywhere. Um, and that's going to be like a real revolution. And I'm like, okay, now we've got the guy who wants, cripple coin and, slow transactions and all that crap. I mean, it's just hilarious to watch how things have changed.
Yeah.
So I hope to be one of the few guys in the next couple of months who has read every single or almost every single email on those threads. And I'm probably going to, I've been basically selecting quotes from one of the guys on there, which I thought were interesting. And I'll probably publish that in some form of a book or something as well.
That's interesting. Yeah. I suppose it would be, actually what I find interesting too is that even when Bitcoin was released, you still kind of saw the same debates starting to happen of like, even there were people that were pretty much hinting at you need nodes or everyone needs a node.
Yeah,
and
right away.
It's interesting. And maybe I would be remiss, not that I like to dwell on this, but I just am more curious. You've clearly studied probably everything written by Satoshi. And I don't want to necessarily get into the debate of who is Satoshi.
Yeah.
But I think that invariably, there's obviously in Bitcoin SV some guy who claims to be Satoshi.
Yeah.
What is your opinion on, like, do they line up philosophically? You've probably read everything Satoshi's written. You've put it on a website. Do they line up, do you think, or is the claim, and this will be used to discredit you. No matter what you say here, it'll be used to discredit you.
I know. Yeah, people are going to get pissed regardless from either side, which is funny. It's kind of hard to be in the middle. I've tried to be in the middle, but I'm learning how hard it is because, like, I'll say, like, I'm more of I consider myself an objectivist, but I'm more of like the ANCAP persuasion in terms of politics. But I dislike some of the rhetoric on the side of BSV about the state. At the same time, I think most of the ANCAPs in Bitcoin Cash are fake ANCAPs and they're not actually capitalists. And I'm not really I'd rather be on the side of I think capitalists who understand economics and want like a very tiny government than ANCAPs who are basically pseudo-socialists and don't know what they're talking about economically. I think one's going to lead to a better outcome than the other. And I don't really care, I guess, whether you're anarchist or whether you're ANCAP or whether you're small government. I mean, ultimately, my concern is private property rights primarily. And so if we're on the same page about property, I'm not really going to worry about a whole lot else. But okay, so Satoshi. I don't think Satoshi was an anarchist. I've had that opinion for a long time.
Why is that?
Well, I think that there's very little evidence to suggest he's an ANCAP first. So I don't think that was ever proven that he was an ANCAP. I think that was just something that was accepted. And when I first got into Bitcoin, I sort of accepted it as well because everyone said that. Everyone was always telling me Satoshi was like out to like destroy the state and all this stuff. And he is, super pro anarchy and, against the government and all this kind of stuff. I see no evidence for that, really. They point to like the one thing about the bailouts and stuff like that, but I can show you, tons of people who hate the bailouts and hate the financial system without being anarchists.
Sure.
So I don't think that's an argument at all. He also has that really interesting quote where he basically says, I'm not making the claim that Bitcoin is for, I guess, subverting the state or being anonymous or something like that. Like that was pretty clear.
Yeah.
The issue of anonymity on Bitcoin was removed fairly early on bitcoin.org. If I remember it correctly, they sort of got rid of the claim that Bitcoin was anonymous. And as I understand it, he never really wanted that claim to be on there. There's a pretty important distinction between pseudonymity and anonymity. And I don't want to get into the debate about what's important and what's not, but like Bitcoin's not anonymous. It never has been. So that was another sort of thing that just got pushed and the narrative sort of got out into the public. And then suddenly you have this idea of, anonymous stateless or anti-government money. I do think it's libertarian in a certain sense, or at least it's compatible with libertarianism. I think it's made from a very deep understanding of economics, which is why I think people who obsess over the degree to which Satoshi can code or not code are missing the point, because I think the insight of Bitcoin was fundamentally an economic insight and a thought experiment. There's a reason that like there wasn't just some brilliant coder who made Bitcoin happen before, right? It's not the code. There's plenty of coders who tried eCash and all sorts of other stuff beforehand and it failed. It was the economic insight. So it wasn't primarily a code thing. It was an economic understanding and a thought experiment that I think sort of came to the conclusion of how you could solve this problem. What else? Yeah, so I don't think he's an anarchist. I don't think there's any evidence to say that. I think I've said those 2 points. I mean, those are my biggest sticking points. I also don't think that he was a cypherpunk. I think he might have been. I think he might have been familiar with them to some degree, but I think it's pretty clear, like from his communications with like Wei Dai and stuff like that, that he didn't. That he wasn't as up to date on some of the stuff as other cypherpunks were. Wei Dai seemed to suggest that he didn't really know Nick Szabo's work very deeply, or he certainly wasn't using Nick Szabo's work. He wasn't using Wei Dai's work in the creation of Bitcoin. So why he cited it? Well, maybe it was for credibility purposes or something like that. But I actually don't think that there's any evidence to suggest that he was under the influence of the sort of predominant cypherpunks of the time in the creation of Bitcoin. I think it was sort of an outside creation.
Yeah.
There was another thing I was going to say about his final email to Gavin Andresen, which was released in the Book of Satoshi, was sort of hinting at the idea that he was upset that Gavin had spoken of him in this sort of as a sort of shadowy, mysterious figure, because it gives it the impression that it has more criminal element to it than he would have liked. And then I think another one was what was it? There was one more I wanted to mention. Well, I don't want to get too down. Yeah. Sure. So yeah, I mean, I think the popular impression of who Satoshi is just wrong. Like, there's no reason to assume that he's an ANCAP. He's clearly, he's clearly not like pro-state, like deeply pro-state. Like, I don't think Satoshi's like a statist. I don't think he like wants to, centrally plan the economy or anything like that. I just don't think there's any evidence to say he's an ANCAP, which is a pretty important thing. And I guess, if you want to say a lot of the arguments against Craig were based on like his political viewpoints, which is completely irrelevant.
Yeah.
And in fact, if you wanted to make the claim that Craig is Satoshi, I think his political viewpoints, I think the idea that Satoshi is not an ANCAP is more correct.
Sure. Yeah. So I think, I think, again, I will put this very, very succinctly. I think it speaks a lot that what you have said about Bitcoin in such a small amount of time is about everything you need to say. And it could go on for hours in other circles where it's like, no, there's other things to talk about, and there's like all these buzzwords like decentralization, all that kind of stuff. It's refreshing to hear, again, just someone who I believe just gets it. I think there are so many people that just get it, and the people that do get it have a firm understanding of economics and a background in economics.
Well, I think Bitcoin's just a lot simpler than people are trying to make it out to be. It's not hobby coin. It's not Tinker Project, where you're just constantly, editing things. I think, once you have an economic understanding of Bitcoin, you can see its possibilities and you can see the limitations of trying to mess with those economics.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not like I'm not for, like, in theory, if there are optimizations that can be made now, then, whatever. But I think it's very dangerous for that to be the mindset that governs Bitcoin.
And I think those optimizations should be done by private entities. That's mm-hmm. what I think bothers me the most is
yeah.
What was happening was, it's very clear to me, and I would love to be proven wrong on this. I would love to be proven wrong on this. It seemed to me at the time, and I think this has been proven to be true, that there were a few market leaders in mining, one of which was CoinGeek, the other was BMG, nChain's entity, and then I guess SV Pool, which was Craig's own entity. It seemed very clear to me that they were technically superior to the other mining pools and capable of mining larger blocks than than some of the other mining pools were at the time. And it seemed like it was like, well, we should optimize the software now so that these other pools don't get kicked off the system and we don't centralize, right? But okay, the optimizations were clearly already done by a few private entities. They should also be done by the other private entities. That's the whole point, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I certainly don't like the idea of like community funded devs who are accountable to nobody because their funding comes from all sorts of random sources who have no real accountability whatsoever, and just shit post on Reddit and Telegram, them being the ones to make these decisions. I just don't think that's intelligent. Steve Patterson has pointed out that, and I think it's true, and it's not to be insulting because devs are very competent, but like being a technical developer does not mean you understand economics or the system of Bitcoin. So this idea that knowing code is somehow a superpower, I mean, it's not, or that it grants you omniscience. I mean, it doesn't. That's the same problem that we had with core.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, Bitcoin Cash, I'd like to believe that their problems are going to be fixed. I don't know how optimistic I am right now, given the way I've seen things going. I mean, it seems more and more that this idea is going to be pushed that we're sort of like the compromise between BSV and BTC. We're like the mixed economy. We're not full statists, That's essentially how I see it. Is like the core guys are in a certain sense like full statist and at least full central planner, let's say, not statist, but full central planner in the way they want to do things. And Bitcoin Cash, it just kind of seems like, yeah, we're like the mixed people, but mixed always trends towards full control.
Yes.
It always does. You can't tolerate contradictions. This is why ideology actually matters, because once you start introducing contradictions into your thought process, it always starts working itself out towards the wrong side, it seems. So I don't really think it's a good idea to market yourself like that.
I think that's extremely well said, because it's and I think this is, again, if you understand that key concept that yes, you may not be as bad as them now, but you've already set the foundation to be as bad as them, right?
Yeah, it doesn't matter what's going on now. People gave me the silliest responses. It was like, we're not even close to 2 megabytes, right? That was one of the responses. It's like, okay, you're missing the whole point. The issue is not the block size necessarily as such. It's how the block size is determined. So a 1 megabyte block size on core was fine for a long time. There were no problems with it. Sure, it was centrally planned, but there were no actual problems because you never hit the limit. The problem only becomes, manifest once you start getting close to that limit. It's the same thing with anything else. It's not the limit necessarily, but it's how it's determined. And unfortunately, these guys want to determine it by a committee. So maybe I'm just repeating myself, but I feel like that's all that's necessary sometimes. It's like, why don't you guys get that it's not what is immediately seen that matters? It's what happens long term. Like, this is the culture you're creating.
Yep.
And it's never going to work out. There's no way you're going to defy economic law. There's just no way you're going to cheat yourself around it. So, this is the perfect time to try to fix that, because by the time you reach scale, it's going to be too late.
I think it's so, again, succinctly put there, and it's just seems so obvious to me, I guess, is where I get frustrated. But
well, I thought it was obvious to everybody, because I remember, and this is why I'm thinking about updating my Animal Farm article, because in Animal Farm, one of the things that happens is when they have their little revolution, they write their sort of like core principles on the wall. And I don't remember what they all are, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, stuff like that. But there's several of them. And over time, like in the middle of the night, the pigs will come in and change it. But no one remembers what it used to be. So they act like those new principles are the ones they're supposed to be following. I remember when everyone said that calling transactions spam was stupid. You're right? I mean, I remember when everyone said that not everybody needs to be able to run a node, that prioritizing nodes is a dangerous mindset. I remember all of that stuff. But now it seems like they've erased the principles in the middle of the night and are pretending it was never that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I have proof. You can go back through old tweets from various people who are now saying a lot of really silly things, and you can see what they were saying before. And yeah, there are some signs that things were going to trend this way, but there are definitely other things where it's like you're openly contradicting what you were saying previously. So it just feels like you're being gaslit in a certain sense.
Well, and I think I'll just say again, I appreciate you even having this discussion because what I do not want to do, and what I think is just stupid, and I see it leveraged at you from both sides, is it's like, oh, Deryk hasn't said he's Bitcoin SV, therefore he's like the enemy, and then Bitcoin Cash side, oh, well, he is saying things that don't agree with me, and therefore he's on the other side, and it's just so absurd because what you've said multiple times, you said it today, nothing you said has changed, and it's just like that's
Yeah.
I've always appreciated the way you thought. So,
Well, I'm thank you, and yeah, people have said people for a while were saying, oh, he's being paid by Bitcoin.com to be quiet. It's like, no, guys, it has nothing to do with that. It's just I'm just taking my own life and doing my own thing. Like, nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
But the other thing is like, and other people were saying I was being paid by BSV people, or now this is the greatest. I was accused of being a bad actor and malicious recently after saying anything about BCH. I'm a bad actor. It's like, come on, guys, like. I feel like I've done a lot trying to promote Bitcoin Cash. I mean, I certainly, I had back in the day, I think probably the most popular sort of resources page for Bitcoin Cash. It was kind of linked to by a lot of the major sites. I was getting a ton of traffic, basically educating people about Bitcoin Cash and all the links to all the various people involved and the articles and the explainers and everything you kind of needed to learn about Bitcoin Cash. So it's not like I want to destroy Bitcoin Cash. I still own my coins. I own both.
Yeah.
Oh, what a scandal that I own both coins. For me, like I'm motivated by my self-interest. I'm not motivated by, aligning myself to whatever group wants me to align myself with, because that's, to me, it's a self-sacrificial, mentality. I don't really care what people are doing. For me, it's like, how can I best position myself to win? And right now, it seems like holding both coins is the ideal position because at the very least, I'm hedged. But a lot of the things in Bitcoin Cash are very concerning. And so I was pointing it out. And if they continue to be concerning, I mean, there's no question that I would dump my coins.
Sure.
But same thing with BSV. Like, I'm not going to I feel like one of the problems in core culture is this idea that you're supposed to die for the blockchain. And I think that's nonsense. Like you saw Jameson Lopp saying things like, I'm going to be out fighting on the front lines to preserve BTC. It's like, shut up. Like that's the exact wrong signal you want to be sending. That you have a bad investment, so you need to go out and go to war to save it. I don't want to play that game.
Yeah.
To me, I want to be on the side that wins.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all.
But I would say I agree with a lot of the stuff that's said in BSV. I'm excited to kind of see where things go with it. I mean, I want to see, I know that there are still some forks coming and stuff like that. In my mind, there's always attack vectors until the protocol is kind of locked down. And even then, things are not guaranteed.
Yeah.
Nothing's inevitable in this space. So, even with something, if BSV has 100% of the right ideas, it doesn't mean that it's guaranteed to win, right? Everything could fail. And that was one of the things that I was surprised the BCH people who were upset were missing. They seemed to make it like this BSV versus BCH thing. Like, ignore BSV. BSV could be shitty, and BCH could be crappy too. It's not an either or thing, right? Yeah. So I guess that's all I would say on that.
Yeah, I think I will be very comfortable. I look forward to February. Should be hopefully the last fork where a rule change ever occurs on Bitcoin is my hope, and hopefully that it becomes true. But we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so surprised that I felt like a protocol sort of that didn't change was something that was understood from early on in Bitcoin Cash. That okay, we're gonna get rid of the limits soon, as quickly as possible, and then sort of be done with things. I guess not. I suppose. So.
Well, I think I'd like to point out to you. You mentioned earlier, but I guess the last point I'll make, which again, it's just saying the same things different ways. Yeah. But the fact that Facebook couldn't come in tomorrow and build an application on Bitcoin Cash because the block size is too small is a problem to me. That just seems like an inherent censorship problem that we like. It's not permissionless. It's not censorship resistant. If someone that has a company large enough can't build an application that would it has too much volume. That's the inherent problem with the block size, and there doesn't seem to be any urgency on any other chain than Bitcoin SV to completely uncap the block size. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, it's well, you said this, the sort of unintended consequences, or like the seen and unseen. So what these guys are seeing is the small node operators on Bitcoin Cash, and they see that, right? But what they're not seeing is the things that are lost, right? So they think, oh, so if we keep the block size small, we're protecting these small node operators. That's the central planner's fallacy, though, is that you're only looking at the immediately perceivable effects. You're not looking at everything else that you're losing out on by pursuing a particular policy. So it's like a government hands out a bailout to a particular company and saves that company, and everyone's like, fantastic, even though they're not thinking about what's the lost human productivity that occurred by doing that. Like, what businesses did you destroy by giving all that money away, or by doing that, by playing that game? And it's the same thing with I think planning the block size is, sure, you might see one or two companies or businesses or developers who are able to continue running nodes because you have protected them, which is essentially what it is. It's economic protectionism. But who else is not coming to your chain, to Bitcoin Cash, because of those limits?
Yeah.
Right. So if you want to stay hobby coin, then do it, I guess. But that's not how you're going to actually achieve global cash. So in my mind, very few good developments on Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash could make me excited right now, because it doesn't really matter. Like, it doesn't matter if the fundamental methodology is not changed. So you could go get another merchant tomorrow, and it's like, who cares? Because that's not going to change anything. Bitcoin BTC had merchants in the early days too. It had a lot of cool, exciting developments. The point is that all of that stuff was destroyed by central planning. So be as excited as you want. Sure, it sounds kind of cool to have some SLP tokens and Townsville or whatever, whatever new exciting thing of the moment that happened. It doesn't actually change anything, though, if you're not following a rational economic path.
Yeah, well said. We're at an hour here, and I think we again could probably repeat the same things 800 more times. But I want to again stress that, like you said, Bitcoin isn't that complicated once I think you grasp some of these things. And so I will definitely, pat you on the back again. I think what you've written over the years is fantastic. I think it's extremely, it was helpful for me just to even be like, oh, other people understand this in this way, and it helps you see it in a different way. And so thank you for everything that you've written, and obviously making sure that like Satoshi's words were never deleted or modified. I think that is something that we desperately needed as well. I will encourage everybody, go to your website, DerykMcGill.com. I'll put a link to that too. But
cool.
I look forward to reading any new articles you write for sure. And I guess, is there anything else you want to get out or?
I had a couple notes. I think we kind of covered everything. I mean, really, like you said, it kind of gets repetitive after a while, because your argument's simple, which is funny enough related to like free markets versus statism or government control. That's actually why I think in some ways free markets struggle. The argument for making free markets is very hard, because you go up there and you don't really offer solutions so much as saying, keep your damn hands off, right? Whereas these central planners come up and they have all these charts and graphs and scientific equations to prove how things are going to be great and how many jobs are going to be created and the ideal number of people in a particular industry, or the amount of tax revenue they're going to collect, and all this other stuff. And it sounds so nice. And it's like, these guys are so brilliant and so smart, but it's the conceit of knowledge. And so I think it goes with Bitcoin too. Like, you can sound kind of stupid when you're presenting a very simple argument compared to someone with a French accent giving a really technical arguments for why we need to prioritize decentralization and node operators. But
it's really, really well said, because the other thing that bothered me, I think I saw it on Reddit, was like Omri telling Steve Patterson, "You've done nothing for Bitcoin," or something like that. It's something like that. And it's like,
yeah,
getting the fact that he, at least in my opinion, understands what makes Bitcoin important and is trying to tell people that. To me
Is
alone, that is something doing something for Bitcoin. And it's the same thing when like core developers were telling people, your opinion doesn't matter because you don't work on the protocol, you don't actually do the development or anything like that. I think that is such nonsense, and I
it's
hope
complete
that like
nonsense.
I'm glad people like you get it, but I hope Steve doesn't stop talking just because his opinion is now no longer valid because of what some technocrat says, right?
I think Steve is used to being on the contrarian side of things. So I don't think he's going to stop anytime soon. And I'm actually excited about some of the stuff he seems to be working on. I
Great.
won't say anything more about that, but I think I'm pretty excited about it. And I think, in Steve's defense too, I mean, good God, I mean, talk about a guy who has done a lot for Bitcoin. He wrote a very, successful book that I've seen thousands of people read on Bitcoin in 2015 that, if you read it today, it's kind of sad to see how far Bitcoin's, sort of gone off that path. But it's a very good understanding of Bitcoin and what it can be overall. Um, the guy did some of the earliest interviews with people when Bitcoin Cash was forking with both Roger Ver and Ryan X. Charles, and made a really good case for explaining what happened in Bitcoin and why Bitcoin Cash, or how it was supposed to fix that. And I know personally dozens and dozens of people who got excited about big block Bitcoin because of Steve. So if that's not like important, what is important, right? I think Steve's done a lot of things, and I think he's someone worth paying attention to. He's a sharp guy, and he really seems to get a lot of it. And I think if Bitcoin Cash is smart, the people involved, they'll listen more to people like Steve and less to the central planners.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said. Well, great. Thanks again for doing this. I really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
this is fun.
I hope maybe we can do it again, but fantastic. Again, we'll tell everyone DerykMcGill.com. I'll throw a link in there. But yeah, excited to see what you do next and all that kind of good stuff. So
Yeah, well, I hope to do some more writing soon. I've been kind of taking a break, but I think it was kind of like what you said. Like you get kind of bored a little bit with what's going on
yeah,
because everything just seems kind of dead. Now I have some more stuff I want to say. I guess because of the way things are going. So I think I'll definitely be writing a lot soon.
great. All right, cool. Well, thanks a lot, Deryk. Yeah, have a good one.
Thank you. You
Yeah.
too.